Hello, how are you doing today? I hope your days are off to a fabulous start. It is a grey, rainy, miserable day here today and I've got a ton of watering to get through, but otherwise things are good. Today though, I wanted to take you through some of the things that I do for my houseplants that have been absolute game changers. Weird ways of growing, specific things that I've discovered, and just generally things that you might not have thought of that really work. But first, if you are new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Yoli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learnt over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. So yeah, grab a hot bevy, get your notepads ready, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So, as I always say with these kind of videos, the things that I'm going to take you through today are in no particular order. But the first one on my list is using reflective surfaces in order to essentially bring more light to your houseplant collection. I know obviously there are things like grow lights and stuff like that that you can introduce, but firstly, a lot of us are trying to save money. And secondly, there are just things that you can do without having to add grow lights in. For example, when I moved into my old flat, you might remember if you've been on my channel for a while, I had this gorgeous dark feature wall and I really liked the look of the feature wall, but I was thinking to myself, what is actually, and this is because I'm obviously plant crazy and preferred to put my plants before my interior design needs. But I was like, what is actually going to benefit my plants the most? And the answer was something that is going to reflect light. So I did end up painting that wall white. And it meant that in the end, I didn't need to use as many artificial light sources as perhaps I would have had to if I hadn't painted that wall. And obviously this space here is currently white as well, which is not always the most interesting. I try to bring more interest to my collection through like the kind of pots and like the ways that I grow my plants. But another way, again, at this time of year, or any time of year to be honest, but I have just recently started doing it as the days have got shorter, but is using things like tin foil in order to reflect both natural light and light from grow lights. I've just noticed that a lot of the plants at the back of my shelves are starting to not go dormant, but just their growth is really slowing down. And I'd like to try and keep them going as much as I possibly can throughout the darker winter months. So I have just started layering tin foil along the back wall, kind of facing the grow light, meaning that essentially the grow light is bouncing off that and kind of hitting my plants from all angles. Again, you can just use normal mirrors to do this. However, I would personally say don't put that like right up against a grow light. Again, it will probably depend on the type of grow lights you use, but I'd imagine if you're using ones that are very hot, for example, it might cause your plants to scorch or burn. But again, I have said, like, for example, in my dining room area that I'm in the house I'm at the moment, that doesn't have any natural light whatsoever. We live in a terraced house, there's no windows on that side. And so we've got this really big mirror right in the middle there that firstly gives the illusion of a window in that space. And I just think makes the room feel a little bit bigger, but also the light from the grow lights and the little amount of natural light that comes from this space is able to bounce off that mirror and in some way benefit the plants that are there, as well as just making it feel nice and bright. I have also said as well, this is not so much a plant growth tip, this is more of a styling tip, but I made a video a while ago about how to make your collection look like it has more plants in it than it actually does. If you're the sort of person that maybe doesn't want to grow hundreds of plants, but you want your house to feel really planty, one of the things I suggested in that video as well was using mirrors, because if you put mirrors next to your plants, it can give the illusion of there being even more, because again, it just reflects all of the greenery. But yeah, just going back to what I was saying about using reflective materials in your collection, again, like I say, I have used tin foil for years and years. It's the cheapest possible thing you can do in order to make your plants happier. And I did actually do it at one point when I had my first cabinet set up. If I can find some clips, I'll put them in. But basically my cabinet was so full and so overcrowded that there were a lot of plants that weren't getting enough light in there. So I just laid tin foil all along that back wall, and I did notice in, I think literally a couple of weeks after I introduced that, my plants were starting to look a lot happier. So yeah, that's 100% something that I think has been a pretty big game changer in my collection and has probably saved me quite a lot of money over the years as well. But then the next one is something that I've only kind of discovered recently, and I did mention it in a video the other day, but a lot of the time I've talked about the fact that plants might not be getting enough airflow around their roots, and that can be the thing that leads to issues. And one thing that I've just started playing about with for some of my plants that are more difficult in this area, such as the Anthurium warocquianum, which is one that I find so hard to grow, is using pond pots, which basically just look like normal pots, but they are filled with so many holes. And you can get them in all different shapes and sizes. Some of them are really, really big, so you can use these for all sorts of plants. And some of the holes are also much bigger as well, whereas others are more like netting. And I just thought this was such a brilliant way to ensure that the roots for your plant are staying nice and aerated, but also issues such as root rot are kept at bay. Because a lot of the time, people often assume that root rot is caused purely by overwatering your plants. And although that, yes, is often a catalyst for your plants going downhill and starting to rot, 99% of the time it does actually come down to the fact that the roots of your plant aren't able to breathe properly. So this is an anthurium that likes quite a lot of water, and in the past I have really struggled with root rot, and I've been like, I don't know what to do. I don't feel like I'm striking the right balance, because if I let it dry out, the plant's unhappy. If I keep watering it, the plant gets root rot. Whereas this time, because it has just got so much airflow, I'm keeping this plant really hydrated. I'm watering it literally at the moment, every kind of 4 or 5 days, which is quite frequently compared to what I've done in the past. But because it's got such a good root system that isn't just being submerged in water and can breathe better, I'm having so much better luck growing the plants. So yeah, going forward, as I say, this is a fairly new discovery for me, but going forward, if I've got plants that are very prone to root rot and do just need a little bit more aeration, this is 100% of what I'm going to be using. I imagine also if you are just a chronic overwaterer, if you're someone that really struggles to strike the right balance with your plants and you're constantly accidentally giving them too much and causing things like fungal issues and, as I say, root rot, then I would perhaps recommend giving something like this a go. There's no harm in doing it. They're also super cheap to pick up. I think this one cost me like £1 something. So yeah, I absolutely recommend giving it a go. And then this next one, I have brought across 3 game-changing, I guess you'd call them just products, game-changing things that I always have in my cupboard of chaos where I keep all of my planty things that I just feel like at this stage with my plants, I couldn't live without. That sounds so dramatic, but things that just really make my life so much easier when it comes to growing my plants. And the first one is isopropyl alcohol. I know I speak about this from time to time when I'm dealing with pests, but honestly, this is such a game changer. And if you are someone that has a lot of plants, I would recommend just keeping this in the house. Again, it's fairly cheap and cheerful. I'll link everything I'm talking about, I'll link down below if you're interested to get the exact one that I get, but to be honest, it doesn't really matter. But this one I use primarily for pest treatment. At the moment, for example, I have come home from holiday recently and I've been dealing with mealybugs, and mealybugs spread like wildfire and they can be really, really difficult to treat. So I've just been putting isopropyl alcohol into a little aerosol sprayer and just spraying down all of the plants that have been affected. Isopropyl alcohol kills on contact, so it will just eradicate the mealybugs that are there as soon as it touches them, basically. I'm not a fan of killing anything, but I would prefer to go in with topicals as opposed to systemic pesticides that kind of get right into the cells of your plant. This is much more of a superficial treatment, and it does sometimes mean that you might need to do a few treatments of it and just kind of keep an eye on things, but I do find it really, really effective. And also you don't just have to use it, or rather you can also use it for other types of pests as well. I've used it for thrips, I've used it for spider mites. Again, it just kills on contact, so it's really brilliant stuff. There are just a few things to be aware of before you start spraying your plants down with isopropyl alcohol. The first one is that whenever you have treated a plant, and I cannot stress the importance of this enough, whenever you have treated a plant, do not go and put your plant right by a window, back in direct sunlight straight away, or back by a grow light, because it will be so susceptible to burning. I have made this mistake myself so many times. In fact, again, one of them was an Anthurium warocquianum, found thrips on it, sprayed the whole plant down, and it had been about 10 minutes, and I was like, yeah, it'll be fine. Put the plant back, and I looked back at the plant literally the next day, and it was covered in these blotches of burn. So personally, I will always treat like last thing at night before I go to bed. I will give the plant overnight to like completely dry out, and even for the next couple of days after that, I am wary about direct sun. But yeah, just do it when you're not going to be putting your plant in direct sunlight, basically. And the other thing to say with isopropyl alcohol is that sometimes I find that if you've got a particularly bad pest infestation and pests have been really kind of like eating into the flesh of your plant's leaves, sometimes, especially with like velvet leaf plants, it's quite obvious. You'll be able to see that like it looks like the colour has kind of been rubbed away. I do sometimes find that if you essentially don't let the damage callus and you spray the plant straight away, the isopropyl alcohol can get more into kind of, I guess, just like the open flesh of your plant's leaves, and it can mark the leaves permanently. Not that obviously pest damage doesn't mark the leaves permanently, but it can make it appear worse. So if you don't want this to happen, what I would probably suggest is, say you come across a plant, let's use this plant for example. Say you come across a plant and you find loads of juvenile thrips on one of the leaves. What I would suggest is I would take a wet sponge, a cloth or something, I would wipe away absolutely everything, and then I would probably give it, I don't know, a day just to kind of sit and be there and kind of like callus, so that when you do spray the alcohol, it's not gonna get in the same way. It almost gives your plants a chance to like heal in the same way as you would have like you cut yourself, if that makes sense. Yeah, I would give it a bit of time before you go in with isopropyl alcohol, but that is, again, just my personal experience. The second thing that I always have in the house is hydrogen peroxide, and this stuff is just so useful for so many reasons. None of this is sponsored, by the way. This is just something that has been a game changer for me with a big collection. I find it's amazing primarily for root rot and root issues. If I've got a plant, and in fact I've got one just next to me here that I'm going to be doing this on later, if I've got a plant that isn't very happy and I suspect that there are root issues going on, obviously I'll usually check the roots first, and if it is root rot, I'll chop back all of the rotty roots. But basically, hydrogen peroxide is just water with an extra oxygen molecule in it, and it means that it essentially just stops rot in its tracks, or has that effect. So I find that if I've got a plant that has got very bad root rot, a lot of the time, if I just mix a diluted solution of hydrogen peroxide, I will usually do 3 parts water to 1 part hydrogen peroxide. And I just let the roots soak in it for about half an hour. Usually after that, that has kind of, again, I guess, aerated them enough to be able to grow again healthily. I've been using it for years. It's really great stuff. Not the most glamorous stuff, but it does the job. And the other thing I use it for is I use it for cleaning containers. Again, like with things like, let me grab one. Things like algae that can sometimes build up in containers. Like you can see this one is currently thick with algae. I'm always getting questions from you guys about how you treat this, and sometimes I will just do a hydrogen peroxide flush. So again, I will mix up a diluted solution, I will pour it into the plant, I will leave it for kind of 20 minutes, half an hour, just to have a soak, and then I will give it a few rinses through, and as it gets rid of the hydrogen peroxide, it will also get rid of all of the algae that has built up. I don't like to do this a lot if I don't have to, because hydrogen peroxide a lot of the time will also get rid of the good things in the substrate. Like it will kill a lot of the good microbes and stuff like that. So I typically do use it for cleaning out vessels when the plant is out of them and root rot. But yes, it's great. And then the other thing is just a decent fertiliser. I know I speak about it a lot, but personally I think if your plant is actively growing and you really want to bring out the best in your plants, making sure it's got a good balance of nutrients is essential. And whenever I've got a plant that I can see is getting ready to give me a new leaf or it's really sizing up, if I run out of fertiliser, I always feel really sad because I'm like, I feel like I could be doing more. I know as well that fertilisers can be expensive. This is the one that I personally choose to use, but you can use whatever suits you best. I think a lot of the time it's about trial and error. Again, personally, I like to use something that focuses on soil health. This is an organic fertiliser. But it really comes down to what you want to do for your collection and what you can afford to do as well. There are also various DIY alternatives that you can use for fertilization. Personally, I don't think anything is ever going to replace something that has actually been tailored and made specifically for kind of all-round nutrients, but there are things you can do if, for example, you go through a phase where you can't get fertilizer. But no, those are the things that I reach for the most in my cupboard when it comes to looking after my plants. And then the next one is propagation boxes and terrariums, but not perhaps in the way that you would think. As I've said before, I have got so many propagation boxes. Typically I will use sphagnum moss. I will just lay a layer of it down on the bottom of the box, put a load of plant cuttings in, close the lid, come back to it a few months later and everything's kind of rooted and happy, and that's a great way to propagate. Really easy, really low maintenance. However, I don't just use those kind of boxes for propagation. I also use them for rehabbing plants, and also sometimes if I'm just feeling lazy and I can't be bothered to look after a plant for a while, but I don't want to get rid of the plant, I will put a plant into something like that to just kind of keep it there without me having to do anything. This is one that I started rehabbing a while back. This is my Hoya macrophylla, which is just in this container with cling film over the top, which basically has just created kind of like a 100% humidity terrarium. It's literally a terrarium. And this plant had mealybugs. I had treated it loads and loads of times and I was just a bit fed up, and I was like, I don't want to get rid of this plant, but I also can't be bothered to keep doing this. So I chopped the whole thing up. I put some sphagnum moss at the bottom. I threw the cuttings in there, sealed it up at the top. I've just put sellotape along the cling film so it is really, really sealed. I haven't done anything to this in 6 to 8 months, I would say, and the plant is completely rooted. It's actually looking all right in there now, so I could take it out and I could pot the plant back up and get it going again if I wanted to. But also equally, if I wanted to just grow it like that, it would probably just continue to grow until it outgrew the terrarium. I also sometimes just take my plants in pots and I will just put them into kind of storage boxes. So long as they're sealed, they will contain the humidity. So what I'll usually do is I'll just put a little bit of water at the bottom, put my plants in there, seal them up, and then I'll just come back to them as and when I'm ready. And for me, that's been a really good way of just kind of figuring out sometimes if I actually want to grow a plant. If I've got a plant that I'm just getting a bit bored of and I'm maybe tempted to rehome, I'll be like, okay, well, what would happen if it wasn't in my collection for 6 months? Would I miss it? And I'll put it into a prop box. And in fact, I've got several in that prop box over there now. If I miss the plant, cool, I can just get it out and I can carry on growing it. And if I don't, then I can pass it along to a new home. So yeah, that has very much taken the pressure off me as a planty person and someone that wants to just grow all of the plants. And it's also just been a really great way to keep my collection low maintenance over time. And another very low maintenance way that I am now growing a lot of my plants that I would never have thought to do initially is using a no drainage system, but also growing in soil. And this is something that would have freaked me out a few years ago. But this is an Anthurium Crystal Hope. Some plants love this, some plants prefer more aeration around the roots. But what I have done is I have just put a layer of coarse semi-hydro at the bottom there. I've made videos on semi-hydro before, but it's basically just lots of porous rocks. That is kind of summing it up in a nutshell. And then I have put a chunky soil mix on top there. So I've got the inorganic and then the organic layered on top. And this is really brilliant in order to kind of replicate kind of how your plants would be growing in nature, because obviously in their natural environment, a lot of plants, not all plants, but a lot of plants will grow terrestrially directly out of the ground in soil, and the soil will kind of just drain through to a layer of like whatever's beneath it. Like, you know, when you dig a big hole, you'll kind of go through different layers of things. You'll find yourself in like quite rocky layers, and then you might find like a watery layer and stuff like that. That's a really bad way of putting it, but this is kind of replicating that same thing. And for that reason, I do find it a really nice way of growing. And so what I do for this plant specifically, this is one that does like quite a lot of water, but it's not one that needs to be consistently moist. Like, I will let it kind of dry out between waterings. What I have found works really well is when the soil on top is quite dry, I'll just stick my finger down and I'll be able to tell when it's dry. Like at the moment, it's had a water, so it is quite damp. But when I do notice that it's very, very dry, then I will just give it a water from the top. I'll let all of the soil there hydrate, and I'll wait until there is a little bit of water just at the bottom of the reservoir here. And then the plant will be able to just wick up what it needs through the semi-hydro, but the soil won't be waterlogged. I don't worry about keeping a permanent reservoir at the bottom as I would if I was growing in pure semi-hydro, but I just find this is a really nice way to make sure that your plant is getting everything it needs without becoming submerged in water. I'd also recommend, if you do this, to use something like I'm using, which is a transparent container, just because then you're able to really monitor the roots of your plant and you're able to kind of get a sense of what's working, what's not. If things look very dry, like perhaps you might feel the top layer of soil and it feels really dry, but you can see there's actually quite a lot of moisture in there. It just gives you a much better insight into what is going on underneath without you having to guess. And I would actually, if possible, recommend doing this for as many of your plants as you can. I don't grow all of mine in transparent containers, but even ones like this, I will keep in transparent containers. This is a semi-hydro plant, and actually I can see that this one needs some attention, but I can also see that there's like a corm in there, which is essentially a little bulb. That means I can propagate the plants and I can just get a sense of where my plants are at. I've got lots of tower pots, and again, I can monitor the root systems because they are transparent. So yeah, transparent pots are a bit of a game changer. But just going back to the no drainage growing, the other benefit of doing things in this way is just that it is far less messy than it is growing things in like normal pots with drainage trays and soil going everywhere and whatnot. It just allows you to really contain everything. So if, I don't know, if you don't have a space that you're able to mess up, maybe you just kind of want to keep things neater, it's a really good way of doing things. And I know I've just spoken about the mix of organic with inorganic, but also, I speak about this one a lot, but also just plain semi-hydro growing. And again, I grow without a reservoir, literally just in an inorganic semi-hydro mix, little reservoir of water at the bottom. I won't go into all of the detail on that in this, but I will link below a video where I explain pretty much everything you need to know about semi-hydro. But there are very few plants that don't like semi-hydro as a substrate. It keeps loads of plants really happy. I think probably at least 50% of my collection is growing in pure semi-hydro now, and it has just made my life so much easier. So much easier, and again, less messy, less soil pests like fungus gnats and stuff like that. It's just been brilliant. So yeah, highly recommend, and I'll link the video with more information on that down below. And having just spoke about semi-hydroponic growing, I also just wanted to address hydroponic growing, which is basically growing completely in water. And although I don't do this long term for all of my plants, I do actually for a very small percentage of my plants, there is nothing to say that you can't do this for more of your plants. This is my Scindapsus Silver Hero that I actually just put some cuttings of into this bottle because I thought it was pretty, to propagate in water. probably about a year and a half ago now. And as you can see, it has got a fantastic, can you see? I know the pattern's getting in the way now, but it's got a fantastic root system in there. I actually need to fill the water up a bit. But the plant is growing really happily in there. It is putting out new growth. I do from time to time put a little bit of fertiliser in there so it's getting all the nutrients it needs. And there's honestly no reason at all why I couldn't just do this long term. I've also got a pothos plant upstairs in my bathroom that is growing purely in water. Again, it started as propagations maybe 3 years ago now, and I just have not bothered to do anything else to it. So I would just occasionally change the water if it looks a bit green, but otherwise it's like the lowest maintenance way of growing ever. And you see people do it a lot with peace lilies. There's lots and lots of plants. In fact, pretty much all plants you would be able to grow hydroponically long term. As I say, there are some that are very heavy feeders in the sense of needing more nutrients that you would need to fertilise more, but there's no reason at all why you can't do this for more plants. So yeah, for ones that you kind of don't want to do anything to, but you just want to look lovely and happy and just look after themselves, absolute game changer. And something that I wish I had been brave enough to do sooner in my collection is chopping and resetting my plants. I know I speak about this a lot in my videos nowadays because, oh my goodness, it's a scary thing to do, but it can just be amazing for really bringing out the best potential in your plants. This begonia, for example, was looking really, really sad for quite a long time. It was looking very sparse. I'd kind of neglected it. And one day I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to literally lop the whole thing into several sections, put it in water and hope for the best. And so that's exactly what I did. You can actually see at the base just there, that's where the original stem was, and that's where I made the chop. And now I have managed to create a much fuller, bigger, bushier plant just because I was brave enough to lop the whole thing back and start again. And I could say the same for things like my Hoya latifolia sarawak. There have been so many plants that I have struggled with over the years, and I've been like, oh, I really don't want to chop them up, but at the same time they're not growing in the way that I'd like. And a lot of the time that reset just helps to kick your plant into action, and it does mean that in the long run you end up with a plant that you're much happier with. And more often than not as well, it will happen really quickly, because I think, and it's kind of like the same principle when you cut your hair or anything, isn't it? But I think that sometimes I would kid myself that if I chop that plant, then I'm going to have to live with like a stump in a pot for the next 8 months, and I'm going to be so sad and all of this stuff. And actually, in reality, a lot of the time having a chop, a propagate, a reset will actually spark your plant into growing way quicker and way better than it was before. So this is not me encouraging to go and take scissors to every single plant in your collection, but if there's something you're not particularly enjoying or you think it could be doing better, what the heck, it will grow back. Make the chop is what I say. A lot of the time as well, mindset wise, it also then makes me want to care for the plant in a different way. I don't know, there's also some kind of like psychological shift, because resetting the plant, it kind of resets the way that you feel about it sometimes. That's what I find. And I've spoken about growing in pure semi-hydro, in pure water, and now I am going to speak about growing in moss. And I actually grow quite a few of my plants nowadays in moss, like full time. I was speaking about it with one of my anthuriums, that one just there, the other day, saying that I hadn't quite managed to strike the right balance substrate wise before. And this plant here is the Drymonia chiribagana, and I love this plant, but I have not managed to find any other substrate where it gives me no issues. Like, I have grown it in soil, I've grown it in water, I've grown it in loads of things, and I've just never got on very well with it. But I always find when I chop it up to propagate it and propagate it in moss, that's when the plant does really well. So nowadays I'm just like, you know what, if it's loving moss, let's stick with moss. And that's when the plant has really kicked into action and started giving me so much growth. And as I say, I could say that for probably 7 or 8 of the plants in my collection. I'm growing them in moss full time, and I have no plans to change that. I think the important thing to remember when you grow in sphagnum moss is that If you are not using live sphagnum moss, if you're using something that you've kind of rehydrated, then over time that is going to start to degrade and it can become quite acidic and sludgy. So it's just something to keep an eye on. It probably won't happen for at least kind of a year or so in my experience, but do just keep an eye on that, because again, that can mean bad things for your plant and the root system. And also, because moss, although it's lovely and airy and it does like equal very happy roots a lot of the time, the only nutrients it contains are micronutrients. It's not going to offer anything really to your plants. So again, making sure that you're fertilizing them regularly is a really good idea. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing to grow in moss long term. I know it's something that people often think of as like a transitionary step to get to, like, I don't know, from water to soil or from cutting to potting up. But yeah, I do just think of it as a growing medium in its own right nowadays. And speaking of moss, I also need to address moss poles, which a lot of people will give their plants to help support the growth, again, offer micronutrients, and just allow your plants to grow bigger, fuller, healthier, grip on, replicate how they are in nature, all of that sort of stuff. And I have actually not got many plants in my collection on moss poles now at all. I've literally just got a few plants on moss poles because they are quite a lot of work to upkeep. They can make your plant more susceptible to pests such as fungus gnats. They require a lot of hydrating because having a bone dry moss pole is pretty pointless. So yeah, for that reason, myself, and by the looks of it, lots of other people in the community have suddenly kind of gone, you know what, we don't have time for this anymore, and lots of people are changing out their moss poles for things like stakes. And if you do still grow your plants on moss poles, when I say plants, I mean primarily climbing plants. They're the ones that are going to benefit. It is a very good thing to be able to do. I am not knocking moss poles for a second, but if you want to be able to keep doing that and you want to keep your work a little bit lower maintenance, again, a nice little hack I can offer you is cling film. And although it doesn't look that pretty, it does just contain the moisture in the moss pole, and it does mean that if you were needing to hydrate your moss poles 3 times a week, you probably will only have to do it 3 times a month. It just really means that the water can't evaporate, and therefore your job becomes much easier and the plant becomes more lower maintenance. More lower maintenance, the plant becomes lower maintenance. So yeah, as I say, I have transitioned a lot of my plants to other ways of growing, but if you are still going with moss poles, I applaud you. I encourage you to keep going, and I would just say, if you want to take that and run with it, I would highly recommend it. I'm doing it for all of the plants I still grow on moss poles, and it does just make my life easier. And another game changer for me, as someone that wants to grow lots and lots and lots of plants and really kind of create a planty environment to live in, but also I don't have like a quadrillion hours every single day to be able to be doing plant care, is mixing up the type of plants that I grow, choosing ones deliberately that are quite low maintenance, as well as some such as the Anthurium warocquianum that do require more hands-on care and more things doing to them. I love Aglaonema as a genus. I know I bang on about it a lot. I think it's got beautiful foliage, but one of the things that I love about it is the fact that I can leave my Aglaonemas for a month here and there and not do anything at all, and know that they're types of plants that are not particularly prone to pests, are fine to dry out between waterings, are really adaptable with their lighting requirements, all that sort of stuff. So I think variation in your collection is key, and I know for a fact that I would not be able to grow, like, if every single plant in my collection had the same care needs as something like the warocquianum. If every single plant in my collection had that, I wouldn't be able to do it. I can grow so many plants because some of them require such little care. So yeah, don't feel bad if you've got lots of alocasias and calatheas and anthuriums and all of these plants that are keeping you on your toes constantly and you don't feel like you can keep up. Trade some of them out for easier things, and I promise you'll still be able to have a planty house, but I promise your life will get easier. And then another little side note, but something I just need to remind myself of from time to time, and that is don't feel you have to give up on things easily. That's not saying that if something is making you truly unhappy and affecting your mental health, you shouldn't get rid of it, but sometimes things will look like they're not going well and perhaps they're dying, and if you just give them a bit more time, then they will be fine. And I took a load of cuttings of my Peperomia incana a while ago. The plant was going downhill, it wasn't doing well. I was really sad. I was like, I'm gonna take some leaf cuttings and I'll see what happens. Chopped all of the leaf cuttings up and put them into a little makeshift sphagnum moss prop box. And I noticed that pretty much all of the cuttings were starting to go rotten and mouldy and not look good and kind of yellow. And the amount of times I almost threw this box out and I was just like, oh, I don't know. And to be honest, I just put the cling film back over it and walked away and forgot about it. And I went back to it this morning and look, it has, one of them has taken and it started to create a brand new plant. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I was so close to throwing this whole thing in the bin. And I'm really glad that I didn't. So yeah, sometimes things just need you to stick with them for a little bit longer. We all lose plants from time to time, but a lot of the time they are more resilient than we give them credit for, and they will find a way to make it through. So yeah, don't feel you always have to give up on things. But there were so many more things I could have put on this list, but I thought I would just try and keep it fairly concise for today. But if you enjoyed this video and you want more like this, comment down below, let me know. I will happily make more like this because, I don't know, I like chatting about planty things that work and things that don't work, and it scratches my brain in quite a nice way. So yes, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.
Stay sexy, plant lovers.